30 years teaching, I thought I understood how things worked. But this bill for the service.
A 72-year-old retired school teacher walked into my courtroom today, and she wasn't carrying a weapon, but she was clutching something far more terrifying. It was a single piece of paper, a medical bill from Mercy Care Hospital totaling $30,452. My name is Judge Simpson, and in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen some cold-hearted cases. But the look in Eleanor Vance's eyes told me this wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a matter of survival. Eleanor had spent 40 years teaching third graders in this city. You could see it in her posture, the way she stood straight despite the weight of the world on her shoulders. But you could also see the exhaustion in the deep lines around her eyes, those wisdom lines that only come from a lifetime of caring for others. On the other side of the room stood Mr. Sterling, a corporate representative for the hospital. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly pension check. He looked at her not as a human being who had educated the children of this community, but as a line item on a spreadsheet that needed to be balanced. He held a thick folder of policies and signed waivers, ready to crush this woman under a mountain of fine print. I opened the case file and looked at the primary evidence. A bright yellow flyer that had been mailed to every senior citizen in the district. It read in bold letters, "Free Community Health Initiative, zero-cost checkups for our seniors." "Mrs. Vance," I began, keeping my voice calm but steady, "please tell me why you are here today." Eleanor reached for the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't from age, it was from the sheer nerves of a woman who had never been in trouble a day in her life. "Your Honor," she said, her voice thin but clear, "I received this flyer. I've been having some chest pains, and I don't have much money left after my husband's funeral expenses. I thought this was a gift from the city. I went in for a checkup. They told me they needed to keep me for observation for 2 nights, and then they sent me home. A week later, this bill arrived. They say I owe $30,000 because my insurance didn't cover non-emergency elective observation." I looked at the bill again. $30,000 for 2 nights of observation that she was told would be free. I turned my gaze to Mr. Sterling. I've seen this type of corporate arrogance before. It's a specific kind of mask they wear, a mask of just doing my job. But in my courtroom, just doing your job is no excuse for predatory behavior. I noticed the way Mr. Sterling didn't even look at Eleanor. He kept his eyes on his tablet, scrolling through data. This is the heartless bureaucracy I've fought against for 3 decades. They wait for people to get old, they wait for them to get vulnerable, and then they use their own health against them. "Mr. Sterling," I said, leaning forward, "does this flyer belong to your hospital?" He didn't even look up. "It was part of a marketing campaign, Your Honor, but the fine print on the back clearly states that any additional services outside of the basic screening are the responsibility of the patient." I looked at the flyer. The fine print was so small you would need a microscope to read it. "She's a retired teacher, Mr. Sterling. She taught children how to read, but I doubt even her best students could read this deceptive nonsense. Do you honestly think it's justice to lure an elderly woman into your facility with the word free and then hand her a $30,000 bill?" The room went silent. The battle had just begun. Mr. Sterling didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses, looking at a digital chart as if reading a weather report, not a death sentence for a woman's life savings. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble, "the hospital operates within strict federal guidelines. Mrs. Vance was never admitted. She was placed under observation status. Under her specific plan, observation is an outpatient service. Therefore, the fees are her responsibility. We have her signature on the intake forms." I looked at Eleanor. She looked struck. "Observation status?" she whispered. "I was in a hospital bed. They brought me meals. They hooked me up to monitors. How is that not being admitted?" This is the content gap between what people see and what the bureaucracy hides. It's a legal loophole hospitals use to bypass price caps and bill seniors directly. "Mr. Sterling," I cut in, "you and I both know observation status is a shell game. You use the same beds and nurses, but label it differently to bill them more. You're telling me because she wasn't admitted, this woman who taught our children for 40 years now owes you 3 years of her pension? Sterling remained unfazed. The law is the law, Your Honor. If the defendant didn't understand her insurance, that is between her and her provider. We are simply seeking the balance. He sat back, radiating the confidence of a man with $1 billion legal team. I turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Vance, when they kept you, did anyone mention this was an outpatient service? Did anyone tell you this wouldn't be a standard admission? Eleanor shook her head, a tear falling. No, Judge. They just said they wanted to make sure I was safe. I trusted them. I didn't think I was being sold a product I couldn't afford. The silence was heavy. The gallery was dead quiet. They were watching their own future. I looked at Sterling. He was looking at his watch, wanting to get to lunch. He had no idea that in my courtroom the clock doesn't stop until justice is served. So, I said, you lured her with a free flyer, kept her for 48 hours under a label she didn't understand, and now you want to take her home. Tell me, Sterling, does Mercy Care have a department for bankrupting teachers, or is it just a hospital-wide hobby? I pulled the itemized bill toward me, all 12 pages of what can only be described as institutionalized theft. I've seen some creative accounting in my time, but this was a work of fiction. I cleared my throat, the sound echoing in the silent courtroom. Mr. Sterling, I'm looking at page 4. There is a charge here for $480 for a patient comfort and hygiene kit. Mrs. Vance, did you receive a luxury spa treatment during your observation? Eleanor leaned toward the microphone, a look of pure confusion on her face. No, Your Honor. They gave me a plastic basin with a travel-sized toothbrush and a tiny bar of soap. I didn't even open the toothbrush because I brought my own from home. I tried to give it back to the nurse, but she said it was already billed. I turned my gaze back to Sterling. $480 for a toothbrush she didn't want and a bar of soap that cost 50 cents at the grocery store? Is the soap made of solid gold, or does Mercy Care just have a very high opinion of its toiletries? Sterling didn't even blink. Your Honor, the kit includes the cost of the plastic basin, the administrative processing of the supply, and the environmental disposal fee. It is a standard bundle charge. A standard bundled robbery, you mean? I snapped. I flipped to page 7. My blood was starting to simmer. Here's another one. Specialist consultation fee, $2,100. Mrs. Vance, which specialist did you see for your chest pains? Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. That's the thing, Judge Simpson. I never saw a specialist. A young man in a white coat stood in the doorway for about 30 seconds on the second night. He asked me if I was feeling better. I said yes, and he walked away. He didn't even step into the room. He didn't touch me. He didn't check my heart. He just nodded and left. I looked at Sterling. He was already shaking his head. The record shows that Dr. Arasov, a top-tier cardiologist, reviewed her charts and performed a consultation. His time is billed at a premium rate. Reviewed her charts from the hallway, I asked, my voice dropping an octave. You're charging a retired teacher $2,000 for a hallway nod? Mr. Sterling, if I nod at you right now, do I get to keep your watch? This is the heartless bureaucracy in its purest form. You create a system where a 30-second encounter is billed like a heart transplant, all while telling the patient the visit is free. Eleanor looked down at her hands. I feel so foolish, Your Honor. I taught my students to always read the instructions, to always be careful. I thought I was being careful, but they made it all sound so official, so necessary. I didn't know I was being fleeced until the bill arrived and my heart started hurting all over again, not from the illness, but from the stress. I leaned back, looking at the corporate representative who seemed to have a heart made of cold, hard data. You didn't just bill her for medicine, Sterling. You billed her for the air she breathed and the floor she walked on. But what you didn't account for is that in this courtroom, we don't follow your master fee schedule. We follow the truth. And the truth is, this bill isn't an invoice. It's a crime scene. I looked over at Eleanor. She was smaller now, tucked into her chair as if she were trying to disappear from the weight of the numbers. Her face, usually bright with the patience of a woman who had spent 40 years explaining the alphabet to children, was now a map of anxiety. I saw the way her fingers traced the edge of that yellow flyer, over and over, like a lucky charm that had turned into a curse. I noticed the pulse fluttering in her neck, the telltale sign of a heart that isn't just physically tired, but emotionally exhausted. Mrs. Vance, I said softly, did they ever give you a choice? Did anyone at that intake desk say, you can choose to be an outpatient or you can go home? Eleanor shook her head, her eyes clouded with tears. They told me if I left, I was refusing medical advice. The young lady at the desk told me that if I walked out, my insurance wouldn't pay for a single dime of the tests they already ran. They made me feel like I was a prisoner of my own heartbeat, Your Honor. I signed whatever they put in front of me because I was terrified I'd end up on the street. I turned to Mr. Sterling. The fire in my chest was moving to my throat. Mr. Sterling, let's talk about informed consent. You had this woman sign a 12-page digital document on a tablet while she was experiencing chest pains, scared for her life, and being told she couldn't leave. Do you consider that a valid legal contract, or do you consider it a corporate ambush? Sterling didn't even look up from his screen. He was probably checking the hospital's quarterly earnings. She signed it, Your Honor. The signature is electronic, time-stamped, and verified. We have a legal duty to inform patients of the risks of leaving against medical advice. If that caused her stress, it's unfortunate, but it's part of the standard care protocol. We cannot be held responsible for a patient's emotional reaction to policy. Protocol. I repeated the word like it was a bad taste in my mouth. You keep using that word to hide the fact that you held a gun to this woman's retirement fund and called it medical advice. You told her she had to stay to be safe, then charged her $30,000 for the privilege of sitting in a bed while nobody checked on her. Tell me, Sterling, if I lock a man in a room and tell him he can't leave without paying me his life savings, am I a hospital administrator or am I a kidnapper? The gallery gasped. For the first time, Sterling finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. That's an offensive comparison, Your Honor. Mercy Care is a high-ranking institution dedicated to community wellness. Dedicated to what? I interrupted, my gavel hitting the bench with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Dedicated to finding the exact threshold of pain a senior citizen can endure before their bank account hits zero. I've seen your wellness reports, Sterling. I know exactly how much the people at the top of your food chain are bringing home, and I'm starting to wonder if your CEO, Mr. Henderson, knows how his marketing team is spending their Tuesday mornings, because right now the only thing Mercy Care is healing is its own bottom line. I leaned back and tapped my gavel against the palm of my hand. The sound was steady, like a ticking clock, a warning. I'm going to take a short recess, but before I do, I want you to think very carefully about your next move, Mr. Sterling. Because when I come back, I'm not going to be asking you about observation status anymore. I'm going to be asking about the man whose name is at the top of this letterhead, and I think it's time he joined our little conversation. The air in the courtroom had changed when I walked back onto the bench. It was thicker, charged with a tension that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. During the recess, I hadn't just been drinking water. I had been looking at the directorship of Mercy Care Hospital. Mr. Sterling was sitting there, his legs crossed, tapping a rhythmic, nervous beat against the side of his mahogany briefcase. He had lost that smug, polished look. He was on his phone until the very second I sat down, likely receiving frantic instructions from his corporate overlords. He knew the wind was shifting. I looked at Eleanor Vance. She was still sitting there, her eyes fixed on the seal behind my head. She looked like a woman who had already prepared herself to lose everything. I've seen that look too many times. It's the look of a generation that worked hard, followed the rules, and now feels betrayed by the very institutions meant to protect them. I saw the way her hand moved to her chest. A phantom pain, perhaps, or just the sheer weight of a $30,000 lie pressing down on her lungs. I noticed the slight tremor in her lower lip, what we call the sign of suppressed grief. She wasn't angry. She was heartbroken that the world had become this cold. Mr. Sterling, I began, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the gallery. During the break, I did a little light reading. I looked at Mercy Care's annual report. I saw that your CEO, Mr. Marcus Henderson, recently received a bonus of $5.2 million for operational efficiency. Would you say that squeezing $30,000 out of a retired third grade teacher falls under the category of efficiency? Sterling cleared his throat, his voice lacking its previous iron. Your Honor, the CEO's compensation is a matter for the board of directors. It has no bearing on the contractual obligations of Mrs. Vance. We are here to discuss a bill, not a balance sheet. That's where you're wrong, counselor, I snapped, leaning so far over the bench that I could see the sweat beads forming on his forehead. In my courtroom, everything is connected. You can't tell me you're a charitable community institution in your commercials and then act like a loan shark in my presence. You told this woman she was safe. You told her the care was free. And then you waited until she was home, alone, and vulnerable to send her a bill that would take her 3 years to pay off if she stopped eating entirely. I picked up the black receiver of the telephone on my desk. The courtroom held its breath. This wasn't standard procedure, but I'm not a standard judge. I looked at my clerk. Get me the corporate office of Mercy Care. I want the direct line to Marcus Henderson's secretary. Tell them Judge Simpson is on the line, and if he doesn't pick up in the next 60 seconds, I'm sending the sheriff to his office with a subpoena for his personal testimony. Sterling stood up, his face turning a ghostly shade of white. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. You cannot simply call a CEO during a small claims proceeding. There are channels, there are motions. Sit down, Sterling, I roared. The channel right now is my phone line. You've spent the morning hiding behind observation status and fine print. Now, let's see if your boss is as brave as you are when he has to explain to me why his free hospital is charging $400 for a toothbrush. The ringing of the phone through the courtroom speakers was the only sound left. It was the sound of a billion-dollar bureaucracy finally being forced to answer the call of a single human being. The ringing didn't stop. It was a rhythmic, persistent sound that seemed to cut through the heavy silence of the courtroom like a heartbeat. Every eye in the gallery was fixed on that black telephone sitting on my bench. I looked at the clock. 30 seconds had passed. Mr. Sterling had stopped tapping his briefcase. He was now standing near the bar, his hands clasped so tightly behind his back that his knuckles were white. He looked like a man watching a slow-motion train wreck, knowing he was the one who had laid the tracks. This is the moment where the corporate shield starts to crack. They think they are safe in their glass offices miles away from the people they hurt. They think a policy is a suit of armor. But in my courtroom, I don't care about your policy. I care about your pulse. I looked over at Eleanor. She was leaning forward, her breath shallow. For 40 years, she had stood at a chalkboard, teaching children about the Founding Fathers, about the Bill of Rights, and about the idea that everyone is equal under the law. She had spent her life believing in the system. And for the last 3 months, that same system had been trying to swallow her whole. I saw the way she looked at the phone, not with anger, but with a quiet, desperate hope. She wasn't just waiting for a bill to be canceled. She was waiting to see if the world she had taught her students about actually existed. I noticed the way she tucked a stray silver hair behind her ear, the gesture of a woman seeking order in chaos. Finally, the clicking sound of a line being connected echoed through the speakers. Mercy Care Executive Suite, how may I direct your call? The voice was young, professional, and completely detached from the reality of the woman sitting 5 feet away from me. This is Judge Simpson of the Superior Court, I said, my voice dropping into a low, dangerous rumble. I am currently presiding over a matter involving a 72-year-old widow who is being sued by your hospital for $30,000. I have your representative, Mr. Sterling, here, and he seems to have lost his voice. I need to speak with Marcus Henderson, immediately. There was a pause on the other end. You could almost hear the gears of the corporate machine grinding to a halt. I'm sorry, Your Honor, Mr. Henderson is in a high-level strategic planning meeting. He is unavailable for the next... Strategic planning? I interrupted, a cold smile spreading across my face. Well, isn't that a coincidence? Because I'm doing some strategic planning of my own. My plan involves inviting the local news crews down here to film a live segment on how Mercy Care lures seniors into free checkups only to bankrupt them. Tell Mr. Henderson he has exactly 10 seconds to get on this line, or his next strategy will be figuring out how to handle a public relations disaster that will wipe out more than his $5 million bonus. I looked at Sterling. He looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. I started counting out loud. 10, 9, 8. By the time I hit 5, the line clicked again. A new voice came through. It was deeper, older, and dripping with the kind of forced charisma that only comes from years of hiding behind a desk. Judge Simpson, this is Marcus Henderson. I'm sure there's been some sort of misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Mr. Henderson? I let the words hang in the air, dripping with a sarcasm so thick you could feel it through the phone line. Is that what you call it when you send out bright yellow flyers promising free care, only to trap a 72-year-old widow in a hospital bed for 48 hours and then hand her a $30,000 invoice? Because where I come from, we don't call that a misunderstanding. We call it a bait and switch. We call it predatory marketing, and in this courtroom, we call it a disgrace. I looked at Eleanor Vance. She was trembling, her hand pressed against her mouth as she listened to the voice of the man who held her future in his hands. This was the man who signed the checks, the man who approved the efficiency protocols, and the man who was currently trying to charm his way out of a disaster. I saw the way her eyes widened, the look of a person seeing the monster behind the curtain. For months, she had been fighting a faceless machine, a mountain of automated letters and cold phone calls. Now that machine finally had a voice, and it sounded like expensive silk and practiced lies. Judge, please. Henderson's voice came through the speakers, smoother now, trying to regain control of the narrative. Mercy Care is a complex organization. Sometimes in the process of billing and coding, errors occur. I'm happy to have my team review Mrs. Vance's file and see if we can offer a significant discount on the balance. We value our seniors. A discount? I slammed my hand onto the bench, the sound echoing like a clap of thunder. You value your seniors? Mr. Henderson, you don't value them. Bureaucracies like yours harvest them. You didn't make a coding error when you charged her $480 for a toothbrush. You didn't make a mistake when you billed $2,000 for a hallway nod from a cardiologist who never even entered her room. Those aren't errors. Those are line items in your operational efficiency plan that earned you a $5 million bonus last year. You're not offering her a discount out of the goodness of your heart. You're offering it because I've got you on a recorded line in an open courtroom. I turned my gaze to Mr. Sterling, who looked like he wanted to crawl inside his mahogany briefcase. He was frantically scribbling notes, his face a mask of pure terror. He knew that every word his CEO said was being transcribed by the court reporter. He knew that the corporate shield had been shattered. I noticed the way he kept glancing at the exit, the flight response of a man who realizes the ship is sinking and he's the only one left on deck. Here is how this misunderstanding is going to end, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm register. I have the itemized bill right here. I have the deceptive flyer right here. And most importantly, I have a woman right here who spent 40 years teaching children the difference between right and wrong. She did her job. Now it's time for you to do yours. I'm not interested in a review. I'm not interested in a discount. I am interested in justice. And if I don't get it in the next 5 minutes, I'm not just dismissing this case. I'm referring this entire file to the State Attorney General's office for a full-scale investigation into Medicare fraud and deceptive trade practices at Mercy Care. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You could almost hear the CEO's legal team whispering in the background, calculated the cost of the scandal versus the cost of the bill. I looked at Eleanor, and for the first time today, I saw a spark of fire in her clouded eyes. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a witness to the moment the giant finally started to stumble. The silence on the line lasted exactly 4 minutes and 52 seconds. It was the longest 5 minutes in Mr. Sterling's professional life. He stood as still as a statue, his eyes darting between the black telephone and my gavel. Then the line clicked. Marcus Henderson's voice returned, but the silk was gone. It was replaced by the dry, hollow tone of a man who had just finished a very expensive conversation with his board of directors. Judge Simpson, he said, the words sounding like they were being pulled out of him with pliers. Mercy Care has reviewed the file. In light of the unique circumstances and Mrs. Vance's years of service to the community, we have decided to write off the entire balance. The bill is zeroed out, effectively, immediately. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by a scattered burst of applause that I didn't even bother to gavel down. I looked at Eleanor. She didn't cheer. She didn't shout. She simply closed her eyes, and for the first time since she entered my courtroom, she took a full, deep breath. I saw the tension drain from her neck, the stiff-necked armor of the persecuted finally melting away. The color returned to her cheeks, what we call the flush of returning life. She looked 10 years younger in 10 seconds. "That's a start, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice cold as ice. "But we're going to do a little more than write it off. You are going to send Mrs. Vance a formal letter of apology, signed by your hand. You are also going to refund the $50 administrative copay she paid at the desk. And Mr. Sterling, you're going to stay behind and fill out the paperwork to ensure this never touches her credit report. If I see a single late mark on Eleanor Vance's record, I won't just call you, Henderson. I'll come to your office myself." "Understood, Your Honor," Henderson muttered. The line went dead. The giant had retreated to its ivory tower, defeated by the very thing it thought it could ignore. A human being with a story. I looked down at Eleanor. "Mrs. Vance, your debt is gone. You taught the children of this city how to read and write. Today, you taught a billion-dollar corporation how to listen. You can go home now." Eleanor stood up, supported by her daughter, and did something I will never forget. She didn't just leave. She turned to the gallery, looked at the strangers who had witnessed her struggle, and gave a small, graceful bow. It was the gesture of a woman who had never lost her dignity, even when the system tried to steal it. As she walked out, I sat in my chambers for a long time. I looked at the yellow flyer, now a piece of evidence rather than a trap. This is the job. It's not about observation status or billing codes. It's about making sure that when a retired teacher walks into a courtroom, she doesn't feel like a case number. She feels like a person. Because the moment we stop seeing the person behind the file, the law stops being justice and starts being a weapon. And as long as I'm on this bench, that weapon will never be used on my watch.